This frame dates back to around the turn of the century. It has great sentimental value to my client, and the objective is to keep it looking the same, but replace all the missing pieces and give it a cleaning. The side casting is missing 2 scrolls. The bottom right-hand corner is mostly missing. The center bottom casting is missing a left scroll. The bottom left-hand corner also is almost completely missing. The left side scroll is missing 2 scrolls. The top right left corner is almost missing completely. And the top center casting is missing 3 pieces. 3 miter joints are loose. They're going to have to be taken apart and re-glued. The first step is to remove the corner blocks from the back of the frame using a chisel. Looking at the miter joints, you can still see the old hide glue. The old glue boiled down horse bones and fish bones was applied to hold the joints together, and it's on the back of these corner blocks, which were made out of old wine cases. You can still see the printing on the back of them. I'm removing the glue with a sharp chisel. The box nails from the back of the corner blocks. The hide glue is scraped off the back of the corner blocks. First step of assembly is I'm applying a thickened white glue. It's an Elmer's glue. I actually poured in a can and let it aerate for a few days or so to thicken it up, and then I use that to apply to the joints. The joints are held in place by a small box nail. I'm using spring clamps to squeeze the joints together. These are actually upholstery springs that have been cut down in pieces. And using my Dremel tool, I carve a little notch on each side of the miter to make a nice place for my spring clamp to catch onto. A small C-clamp is added to the inside of the miter to make sure it sits level. Now all 3 joints have been glued and clamped. The next day, the spring clamps are removed. Going to turn the frame over and sand off the hide glue from the back of the frames at the corners where the corner blocks will be attached. Again, I'm applying the white glue to the back of the frame and the corner block, press them into place, and use small box nails to attach them to the back of the frame. Cleaning the excess glue off with a wet rag. Now this quarter round molding around the edges has hairline cracks in it. So the first thing I'm doing is rubbing glue into the cracks with my hands. Going to clean it off. This will harden the whole area up. That has to be done on all 4 sides. I'm now using a sill putty to make an impression of the corner. The sill putty is pressed in to make sure I get all the details in one corner. I also made a mold of 1 separate scroll on the side, and I'm now preparing sill putty, epoxy putty, and pressing it into the mold. When the epoxy putty has hardened, it's removed from the molds. I'll be making 3 corners from this one mold. Now that separate scroll mold that I made, I'm using this scroll to attach to one of the side castings. I don't have one side casting that's complete with all pieces, so this one needs one scroll. I'm going to cut and fit this scroll and glue it to the frame. It's held in place by masking tape. Next day I do a little shaping with my Dremel tool, and freehand I'm going to push the epoxy putty into place and shape it by hand where it's needed. This now is one complete side ornament that has all the pieces on it. I'm going to use the sill putty to make an impression of this side casting. This one here will give me the pieces to use on the other 3 sides. So first step is I'm taking one corner piece and cutting it out to shape to fit it into the area where it's needed. This takes a little sanding and fitting. I have to router out with my Dremel tool the inner contour of the piece. And again, you fit it and try it, and a little sanding and grinding until the piece fits in nice. So I'm going to attach this corner piece using the white glue. This is going to be held in place by masking tape and allow it to dry overnight. The same procedure was done to the other 3 corners. Now all the corners have their pieces cut into it. I'm now going to the side molding that we made, and pushing the epoxy putty into that, prepare all the pieces that's going to be needed for the sides. Now right here, this corner piece, all the little gaps that are open around it, those all have to be filled. So all 3 corner pieces, we're going to do a little freehand work with the putty on the bottom sides as well. Going to start on the bottom using the putty, put it into place, little freehand shaping. You can use gesso if you want. That's the material that was used originally. The epoxy putty is a little bit easier to work with. You don't have to heat it up. It still gets in and around everywhere, like the scroll. Make sure all the inner places are cleaned out nicely and shaped. And it dries just as hard. Using my fingers and some chisels to push the putty in and around all the ornaments. You can use a little water to dab on it, makes it a little bit easier to spread that putty around. Here's a corner we're going to start putting the pieces in, like these 2 scrolls that was missing. Here's another scroll in one of the outer corners that needed a piece. Another side ornament missing this piece of the scroll. Now it's time to do a little freehand work on these side ornaments. Again, filling cracks and crevices and places where it's needed. Push the putty and shape it. Using a little fine sandpaper around the edges. Sand it smooth all together. couple small hand files to get in around all the harder areas. Now that the repairs to this frame are completed, it's time to work on the finish and the touch-up. But we have to see how the finish was made up so that our touch-up will match it. First of all, when you look at the frame, you kind of see this little glow coming from the bottom, a gold glow. So originally this frame may be covered with a gold leaf, or the frame may have been a bronzed finish where they take the finish is made of fine ground up particles of bronze, gold, nickel, and copper till you get this gold color, and then it's pulverized into a powder and it's mixed with a shellac or lacquer and sprayed onto the frame, and it looks like a gold color, and it has a little metallicness to the sheen. What happened is it started out one of the two, and over time it had been touched up with a bronzing powder. If you look at some areas, like over here, it's very, very dark. Along the bottom here, it's very dark, and in other places, and that usually happens with the bronzing powders. What happens is they start to tarnish and it gets dark. Now the bottom of all frames anyway that are old, it's always dark on the bottom because dust always falls downward. It gets darker over here. But this dark color is sort of a coppery dark color. So question is, how do we touch up the new pieces to match it with this? I think I'm going to take one step and clean this finish and try a mild solvent to remove some of that bronzing touch-up that had been applied over the years to get down to a better platform, a better color area, and then we'll use that as our sample to put on the new pieces that are on the frame. So let's start that process. I'm going to start to use various chemicals to see what might dissolve some of this touch-up. I'm going to start with a naphtha because there are some touch-ups that have a wax base that they have a bronzing gold color mixed in with, and that would dissolve with naphtha. And it's the mildest of solvents that I have here, so we're going to first give a little rub and see if anything comes off with the naphtha. And so far, no. Okay, really didn't change that much. So this touch-up is not a wax base. I'm going to try some denatured alcohol now. This is a little stronger. This will dissolve anything that might be a shellac base. Nothing's coming off. Okay, nothing came off, so this touch-up is mixed in with something stronger. It's probably some kind of a lacquer. This is a little thinner. It's a lacquer thinner. It took off just a light little bit of color, which is okay. That's all I'm looking for. All right, doesn't seem to be doing that much harm, and enhanced it a little bit, so I'm going to clean the whole frame with a little bit of this lacquer thinner. Now that the frame is clean, we have to figure out how we're going to go about doing the touch-up. So I like to first find what was on the lowest part of the finish and start with that color. If we look carefully, we see a little traces of a black here on this half-round molding. That's actually a clay. That's a clay that was used on top of the gesso. That was used as a foundation to do water gilding. So real gold leaf was applied with water technique on the moldings, and it probably went over all the scrolls. All the high edges probably had a real gold leaf, and all the flat edges probably on the frame was just a bronzing powder. This way you have a high shiny accents on the high edges and the lower sheen type of a gold color on the flat edges. So before we go ahead and start doing the finish, we're going to go ahead and start using this very dark color right here and apply it on where we need it, on the moldings, on the scrolls, all the high edges. That's the first step. I used powdered pigments of drop black, raw umber, and a little flake white mixed with lacquer to create the dark clay color. I'm now using a small sable hair brush to apply it to all the higher edges that need that color. We want this color to be put on first so it emanates through the gold color, which will later be applied on top. And when that dries, I'm using a little fine steel wool to rub out the gray touch-up area, smooth it off, and now I'm going to start to apply the bright gold bronzing powder. That's going to be applied right over the gray clay color that was applied, and then all the places where gold is needed. We're going to start out bright. We'll get into touching up the color later to antique it. Now all the bright gold bronze powder has been applied to all the new castings and pieces that were made and all the places that may have needed gold. The next day we're going to smooth off that gold bronze that we applied using the fine steel wool. Now we're going to start to tone down the bright gold to the antiquing color. I mixed a little raw umber and dark walnut alcohol stain together with lacquer, and I'm applying the first coat. I'm not trying to catch the color all in one shot. I'm going to start to head in that direction, light coats little at a time, and each time we'll come back to it and adjust the color. Now in this area on the bottom, I'm applying the brush and using a wider brush as a stippler, stippling the color to spread it out. Now using a finer brush, I'm using a darker color. It's a darker raw umber drop black color, and I'm outlining all the new pieces. This will create a little barrier, make the edges stand out, give it a little depth. All the cracks and crevices, you put a little dark color and outline it. we're at the point with this frame where things are starting to come together, and now is the time where I like to look at things and see what's a little too dark needs to be lightened, and what's a little too light needs to be darkened. And after we check out all the new places that we worked for color, then we'll start to fine tune it, maybe a couple cut edges here and there, little worn spots, a little bit of that darker clay color that we put on at the beginning of the touch-up show through. So we're getting close, so let's fine tune this frame. Again, I'm using a little fine steel wool to smooth off all the places where we added color. And now I'm going to start to touch up areas that need a little darkness. A little touch up here and there, a little shadowing. Now I'm using the bright gold and touching some places that need a little brightening. Finally, a last little light steel wooling over all the areas that were worked on and touched up. As you're steel wooling, I'm letting the fibers of the steel wool remain there and using a wider, short hair, stiffer brush to rub the fibers of the steel wool around all the areas that were working into all the nooks and crannies. Make sure everything smooths out and everything jives together. This will knock down the sheen and give overall the whole frame more of a uniform sheen. The frame and portrait are together again.